Buildings like the White House, the Capitol Hill building, and the Pentagon, they're no-fly zones. It's called P56. And what happens is when you enter that no-fly zone, especially you get into the inner cores of it, if you're not broadcasting the codes that allow you into that space, then you will be shot down. Another thing is that there's ground-to-air missiles protecting that no-fly zone as well. Now, the organization that is designated to protect America and Canada from the air is called NORAD. And they have centers, NORAD, all over to react to situations in that area. The one relevant to 9/11 is called NEADS. It's at a place called Rome in New York State. And it is the one that reacts to these things and gets military planes in the air to go up there and see what's going on, and also to try to force the plane down. And if it's threatening a civilian area, to shoot it down. In the year before 9/11, 125 times this happened. So what happened on 9/11 is that this system was suspended for some reason. And in a period of some 2 hours while this was playing out, not one single military plane was scrambled that made any difference to events. 10 miles down the road from the Pentagon and the White House is the Andrews Air Force Base. The Andrews Air Force Base is where Air Force One comes in and foreign leaders come in and then get helicoptered to the White House. They do not have planes on standby to react 10 miles down the road to the no-fly zone over Washington. After the Pentagon was hit, as was widely reported, planes were scrambled from the Andrews Air Force Base to protect other attacks of Washington. What weren't they before? Because it had to be allowed to happen. Now, here's another kicker. First of all, at least some of those phone calls couldn't have happened. And if some of them didn't happen, the question is, did any of them happen? And according to American Airlines, that's what Flight 77 was, the airphones were taken out or dismantled by the time of 9/11 on 757s of American Airlines. That's in their own manual saying that. I've quoted from their manuals. Pilots and cabin staff have said the same. Oh no, there were no airphones on 757s at that time on American Airlines. We're on United Airlines, not on American Airlines. Then you have a story of a passenger on Flight 93 calling his wife, a man called Tom Burnett. And his wife said that when the call came, his cell phone came up, right? So he's calling on a cell phone. And they had a conversation. The FBI was saying that these cell phone calls were made from these planes, right? They pointed out you certainly couldn't then, make cell phone calls from the altitudes they were talking about. Absolutely impossible. So suddenly the FBI story started to change and they became airphones instead of cell phones. And Burnett's calls to his wife, when his cell phone comes up, suddenly became an airphone. It wasn't. And by the way, at the time those calls were made by Burnett, according to the flight data recorder, Flight 93 was flying at between 34,000 and 40,000 feet. So it's impossible for him to make a call. Another guy, Todd Beamer, the cell phone of Todd Beamer made 19 calls after Flight 93 crashed. Have you heard of something called Operation Northwoods? Well, Operation Northwoods was basically, in so many ways, 9/11 in 1962. At the time, in 1962, the American military, Pentagon, wanted rid of Castro in Cuba. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military command level of the Pentagon, which was fundamentally also involved with 9/11, they put this plan together called Operation Northwoods. Ladies and gentlemen, see if you recognize this. And this is not me pulling it out the ether. I am quoting here the official record from the official American archive. The plan was, most relevant to 9/11, to have a plane flying from a commercial airport on the East Coast that would take it in its normal route across, at a high altitude obviously, Cuban airspace. This plane, Operation Northwoods documents say, would be full of, this is the quote, carefully selected passengers with carefully selected aliases. The plane would take off, and over Florida, a military CIA plane of the same type, painted in the same airline colors, a drone, 1962, would take off from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, would get close to the original plane, so basically the dots started to merge, and the drone would be flown on the route over Cuban airspace, and with the passengers, that plane that took off from the airport in an absolutely scheduled flight would be landed at Eglin Air Force Base and the passengers removed. Note how few passengers there were on those planes on September the 11th for what would have got to business time in the West Coast. These documents said that this drone, without a pilot, would be flown in the colors of the airline and the scheduled flight. When it got over Cuban airspace, they would explode the plane by radio signal. And it even says in the document, and we won't report it, we will wait for the international aviation authorities to tell us that it's happened, so that there's more credibility that we didn't know about it. And the idea was to blame it on a ground-to-air missile or a plane from Cuba, and justify an invasion of Cuba as a result of that. All these years later, in 2001, basically Operation Northwoods, much expanded, played out in America and justified what? The invasion of country after country, in the same way they wanted to use that as an excuse to invade Cuba. Everywhere you look, this story falls apart.